The second Prince Harry said her name, this stopped being a courtroom story and turned into a marriage story. Because suddenly, under oath, in front of a judge, with cameras, reporters, and the entire world leaning in, he pulled a woman from his romantic past straight into his present, and now everyone is whispering that the real damage from this trial might not be legal. It might be personal. This was supposed to be about privacy, about press intrusion, about the pain of being watched and followed. But instead, it became emotional dynamite lobbed right into the middle of a marriage that already lives under relentless scrutiny. And the blast radius didn't stay inside those courtroom walls. It stretched across the ocean, straight into Montecito, straight into Meghan Markle's world, where commentators are openly asking the question no one can ignore: how does any wife feel hearing her husband publicly admit he's back in contact with an ex-girlfriend during one of the most high-profile legal battles of his life? Ricocheted not just here in the United Kingdom, but in Montecito too. Because trust me, this has been a devastating 24 hours for Prince Harry's marriage. He admitted, and we're going to get into this because the mainstream media are ignoring it, right away the tone was explosive. This wasn't framed as trivia. This was framed as fallout, as something that hits at home, not just in headlines. And then came the detail that made jaws drop. He's also admitted to being back in contact with another ex, another woman who got away, Natalie Pinkham. All of this explains why Meghan Markle was so furious about this case being brought in the first place. Back in contact. Not they once dated. Not she was part of his past. Present tense. Active. Real. And the difference between past and present is everything when you're married and the whole world is listening. Because now this isn't speculation cooked up in tabloids, this is courtroom testimony. And suddenly, the trial about media intrusion starts sounding like an emotional rewind of Harry's love life before Meghan, with one of those women no longer just a memory, but someone he's speaking to again. So naturally, the focus shifts. Not did the press cross a line, but how is Meghan processing this? Oh my goodness, Lady Colin Campbell, the exes are back on the scene in so many ways. What did you make of this extraordinary evidence from Prince Harry and the fact that you can understand in a way why Meghan ain't happy? The exes are back on the scene. That phrase alone turns history into a current storyline, not dusty memories, active players in today's narrative. And when you put that in the context of sworn testimony, it stops being harmless nostalgia and starts feeling like emotional reopening. Then the timeline made it even hotter. The other big revelation that emerged during the trial, and we know that Meghan Markle will be absolutely livid about this, is that Harry is back in contact with Natalie Pinkham. So Prince Harry tells the judge that Natalie Pinkham contacted him yesterday, not years ago, not we reconnected once, yesterday. That word alone shifts the emotional temperature from warm to boiling, because now this isn't ancient history, it's current communication between a married prince and a former girlfriend, revealed in open court. And Harry didn't just mention her casually, he dug into why their relationship collapsed. It broke down precisely because of the distrust, and it led to me not speaking to her for years. It seemed as though someone was leaking these stories, but I now believe that it will have come from listening into our communications. Listen to the emotion in that. Distrust. Hurt. The sense that something meaningful was poisoned from the outside. That's not someone shrugging off an old fling, that's someone revisiting emotional wreckage. And when that kind of reflection happens publicly, people start asking the uncomfortable question: do feelings ever fully disappear, or do they just go quiet until something drags them back into the light? The panel reaction only poured fuel on it. But Sidley, how do you think Meghan Markle is going to feel about the fact Harry and Natalie Pinkham are back in contact? I'm afraid for Harry. I would be furious. That's someone placing themselves directly in Meghan's shoes and saying what many are thinking. Because no matter how trusting a relationship is, hearing your husband talk about renewed contact with an ex in court is not exactly a relaxing headline to wake up to. And then came outright alarm. I am shocked that he would admit that he was talking to an ex-girlfriend on the stand. This is not going to go well. I'm really scared what's going to happen in the next 7 days. This is not going to go well. That line instantly transforms gossip into predicted fallout. Arguments, tension, late-night conversations behind closed doors, the kind the public never hears but endlessly imagines. Then the comparison narrative slipped in, and that's where things get truly sensitive. We know because of the evidence 2 things. Number 1, Harry still feels deeply emotional about these women. Number 2, these women are the polar opposite of Meghan Markle. That's the kind of statement that detonates quietly. Because now it's not just contact, it's emotional weight. And once people start talking about opposites, gossip culture immediately fills in the blanks, fairly or unfairly, and turns it into comparison drama. From the outside, this trial was meant to be Harry fighting the press. But emotionally, it's turning into a replay of his romantic past, with former girlfriends being discussed, remembered, defended, and now contacted again. And that puts Meghan in a strange position. She's the present, but the spotlight is suddenly scanning the past. It's not just about jealousy, it's about timing, optics, narrative. This was supposed to be a united stand against intrusion. Instead, it's reopening chapters from before Meghan was even in the picture. Relationships being described as damaged, meaningful, and emotionally intense. And when Harry speaks about those relationships with detail and feeling, it doesn't sound like distant history. It sounds personal, alive, unfinished in memory, even if finished in reality. That's the kind of emotional echo that makes headlines feel heavier at home. He likely intended to show harm, to explain how intrusion wrecked trust. But in doing that, he also reminded the world, and by extension Meghan, that those women mattered deeply once. Enough to be remembered vividly. Enough to be defended years later. Enough to still be part of his emotional story. That's not a legal footnote. That's emotional history resurfacing in the most public way possible. And now, the lingering question isn't just what the judge will decide. It's what happens when the cameras are gone, the court adjourns, and the real conversation begins behind closed doors. About past loves, present trust, and why this trial meant to bury the past may have accidentally resurrected it. And here's where the emotional pressure really starts to twist. Because this isn't just about who Harry used to love, it's about how those stories are being retold now in a courtroom with Meghan nowhere near the narrative except as the silent figure everyone keeps imagining in the background. Because let's be honest, every time Harry describes the emotional damage of those past relationships, every time he explains how paranoia, fear, and press intrusion tore things apart, the subtext writes itself in gossip circles. People start painting those former girlfriends as tragic figures in his story. Women who suffered, who withdrew, who couldn't survive the chaos around him. And the moment that picture forms, comparisons sneak in, whether anyone says them directly or not. That's where things get uncomfortable. Because Meghan has never played the quiet, retreating role. She fights back. She speaks. She challenges narratives. So when Harry talks about women from his past who were overwhelmed, who pulled away, who disappeared from the spotlight, the contrast becomes gossip fuel. Not because he says it, but because commentators do. Suddenly, the love story people once framed as Meghan saved Harry gets tangled up with Harry had deep, meaningful relationships before. And some people think those women were better suited to the royal pressure cooker. Fair? Not necessarily. But in the world of public drama, fairness is optional, tension is everything. And here's another layer. Emotional memory is powerful. When someone recounts heartbreak in vivid detail, it doesn't sound like a closed book. It sounds like a chapter they can still feel. Harry describing mistrust, emotional strain, and the collapse of intimacy doesn't just explain a legal argument, it replays emotional vulnerability tied to someone who isn't his wife. Even if there's zero romantic intention, even if it's purely reflective, the optics are brutal. Because the public doesn't see nuance, they see a married man talking passionately about a former partner while saying he's back in contact with her. And once that image exists, it lives rent-free in headlines, comment sections, and late-night panel debates. And Meghan, she becomes the invisible character everyone narrates for. How must she feel? Is she angry? Is she blindsided? Did she know before he said it in court? Those questions become their own storyline, and the wild part is that she doesn't even have to say a word for the narrative to spiral. Silence becomes interpreted as tension. A neutral expression becomes fury. A busy schedule becomes distance. That's the trap of high-profile love. You don't just live your relationship, you perform it under a microscope, and any mention of the past becomes a crack people try to pry open. What makes this even more explosive is that this trial was meant to be about protecting personal boundaries. Yet ironically, it has dragged some of the most intimate emotional history back into public view. Harry is fighting the press while simultaneously giving the press emotional flashbacks to dissect. It's a contradiction that gossip culture absolutely devours. Because now, the story isn't just Harry versus tabloids. It's Harry revisits old love while Meghan watches the world react. And there's something else simmering beneath the surface. The idea of unfinished emotional business. Not in a romantic reunion way, but in a this still hurts when I talk about it way. When someone explains a breakup with that much emotional clarity years later, it tells you the wound left a mark. And people start wondering whether talking to Natalie again reopened that emotional file, even briefly. That doesn't mean rekindled romance, but it does mean emotional memory resurfacing. An emotional memory inside a marriage can be tricky terrain, especially when it's being discussed on a global stage stage instead of privately over dinner. Imagine being Meghan and knowing that millions of people are now replaying your husband's past relationships, debating their significance, comparing personalities, and speculating about your reaction, all while you're trying to maintain a public image of strength and control. That's not just awkward, that's exhausting. And then comes the narrative twist that really fuels the Meghan furious angle. This case was reportedly something she wasn't thrilled about from the start. The stress, the exposure, the reopening of old wounds, and now look what's happened. The trial didn't just attack the press, it pulled his exes back into the storyline. So gossip commentators frame it like a cruel irony. The fight for privacy just made their private emotional history public again. That framing alone makes it sound like a marital I told you so moment waiting to happen. And here's the thing about marriages under pressure, it's rarely one big dramatic explosion. It's tension layered on tension. Travel, media heat, legal stress, public criticism, and now this. A small emotional spark can feel bigger when everything else is already stretched thin. People start analyzing body language in old photos, they speculate about separate schedules, they read into interviews. Every normal fluctuation in a relationship gets magnified into proof that something is wrong. That's the environment this courtroom confession just dropped into. The tragedy, or brilliance, depending on how you look at it, is that Harry was trying to show how deeply intrusion damaged his life and relationships. He was trying to prove emotional harm, and in doing so, he reminded everyone just how emotionally invested he once was in women who are not Meghan. That's not betrayal, but it is emotionally complicated. And complicated is the oxygen gossip breeds. Because fairy tales are simple. They met, they fell in love, they saved each other. But real life, especially royal adjacent life, is messy. There were loves before. There were heartbreaks before. There were women who shaped him before Meghan ever appeared. And now those women are back in conversation, not as shadows, but as named, remembered figures in sworn testimony. That shakes the fairy tale framing a little. Not enough to break it, but enough to crack the glass and let speculation seep in. And that's why this story won't die quickly. The legal verdict will come and go, but the emotional imagery, Harry on the stand discussing an ex who contacted him yesterday, that sticks. That becomes part of their public relationship narrative, whether they like it or not. Because in celebrity culture, perception often matters more than truth. And the perception right now is this. A marriage already under relentless pressure just had the ghosts of past relationships invited back into the room in the most public way possible. So while lawyers argue law, the public argues love. While judges weigh evidence, viewers weigh emotions. And long after the courtroom empties, one question keeps echoing louder than the legal outcome ever will. When the doors close, the microphones are gone, and the world stops watching, what does a conversation like this sound like at home?